Welcome. Thank you guys for coming. I just want to say thank you first before we begin the debate. My name is Craig Caudill with the Affirmative. We want to say thank you to every single person who's in this room, first of all. I want to thank a flagship university known worldwide for participating in a groundbreaking event. It means a lot to us. I want to thank every one of you judges who are taking time out of your personal life to come up here and be a part of this. It's made a big difference to each and every one of us. I want to say something that's important that everybody should know. Education is not only a key for the success in your life, it's a key for a success in our life also. And this right here is a component of that very thing. That alone will help us become better people, learn from our mistakes, get out there in that world, and become good citizens and good people to contribute to our communities. It'll lower the recidivism rate drastically. So this is a groundbreaking event, and we thank you so much. It means so much to us to be able to participate in this. It's an honor and it's a privilege, so thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and begin. You ready? Timer, start. This is the affirmative side that we're talking about right now. I'm going to give you a 4-minute presentation on it. We have 4 points. Our 4 points, I'll give you those 4 points as soon as I give you the resolution. The resolution that we've come to is Trump's Achilles heel is his foreign policy. Now, everybody knows what the Achilles heel is, so we have the right to define what Achilles heel is or anything within that resolution. What we're going to define is Achilles heel. Achilles heel is defined as his primary weakness, not his only weakness, but his primary weakness that can prevent him from becoming elected. That's the definition of Achilles heel. We've got 4 points, and I'll get to those 4 points, but what I'd like for you judges to understand, you've been tasked with determining whether the affirmative wins or not by a weighing mechanism. That weighing mechanism is logic. All of you are successful. Wardens, public servants, professional athletes, ministers, volunteers. You've struggled, you've worked hard, you've gotten to where you've gotten because you've gone through life experiences and you've overcome them. If you got to where you are today because of that. That life experience is exactly what we want you to use for your logic to determine whether the affirmative wins or not. It's very simple. This is a tool that you already have. There's nothing outside that you need to work on using. Just that simple logic that you've already acquired. There's 2 most important things I'd like for you to remember. 1, the negative is going to try to distract you from what our points are with things that don't really have anything to do with the resolution. And number 2, there's a center window that I want you to remember. And that center window is the resolution and nothing around it. I want you to remember that also. Our first point is Donald Trump's temperament hasn't affected his success. Donald Trump has insulted Hispanics. He's insulted black men and women. He's insulted women of all color. He's insulted Muslims. But his numbers have continued to go up. So no matter what his temperament is, that doesn't seem to affect his success. That's our first point. No matter what Donald Trump has done, his temperament has not been affected at all. His temperament has not affected his success in the polls at all. Number 2, our second point is Trump's foreign policy approach is unstable. He's flip-flopped on Iraq. He first said that he supported the war in Iraq in 2001 on the Howard Stern show. Then he said, oh no, I don't support the Iraqi war. I don't support that. Then he denied even admitting that he did support it. So not only did he flip-flop on it, he denied that he actually endorsed the war. So that approach is unstable. That's our second point. Our third point is Trump jeopardizes relationships with other countries. He said that we should abandon NATO obligations for the United States if countries that can't even afford it don't pay us to go and protect them when they need it. That's called a mercenary. That's not America. America doesn't do that. So he jeopardizes our relationship with other countries. And our fourth point, America needs a leader. We need a leader that doesn't waffle back and forth on every policy almost. We need a leader that's strong and concise. We need a leader that's respected. We need a leader that doesn't get in Twitter fights with presidents of other countries. I have a daughter, and 11-year-old little girls get in Twitter fights. You called me this. No, you said that. No, you lied. No, I didn't. That's not a president. That's not the leader of the free world. We don't want him representing any of us. certainly not our entire country, and certainly not the safety and security of the entire planet. That's our fourth point. You need to vote for the affirmative. I'd like for you to consider that right now. These 4 points and your logic is the only thing required.
Is this working? Yeah. All right, are you ready for cross-examination?
Begin.
Yes, we are.
All right, and let's start. Okay, so when you try and isolate temperament in your first point, are you saying that his temperament has nothing to do with these issues you list with his foreign policy?
Our first point explains that Donald Trump's temperament, as crazy and wild as it may be, has not affected him in a negative manner among the American voters. He still is going up in the polls at many times, even after he has insulted Ted Cruz's father or Ted Cruz's wife, and then now Ted Cruz is on the phone with him, phone banking right now.
Absolutely. All right, so when we go to this idea of what an Achilles heel is, can you just reframe that for me really quick to explain like what weakness we're looking at?
Sure. If you remember, Achilles was an invincible warrior.
Absolutely.
And he had more than one weakness, though. He had love and pride as weaknesses. But his primary weakness, the one that could beat him, was the Achilles heel. It's not to say that he couldn't be beat other ways, but that Achilles heel was the primary weakness, the one that can prevent him from being elected to the president.
Okay, thank you. Can you please synopsize really quick for me how foreign policy is Trump's Achilles heel?
You want to go? His Achilles heel, from the foreign policy's point of view, is simple. He has absolutely no political relationships with anyone, anywhere in the world, political-wise, because he may have done business, but making profit for yourself in another country is not the same thing. The head of Sony shouldn't be in charge of Japan tomorrow just because he's a good businessman.
Mm-hmm. But how is foreign policy going to be what keeps him from getting elected? If he has, if no one responds to anything he does, how is foreign policy going to be the thing that keeps him from getting elected?
I believe we said our definition is that he can be defeated, not that he will be defeated.
But you listed your foreign policy, this foreign policy, as what it's going to do it. I'm asking how.
Could you please clear the question?
So you, in your framework, you theorize that he can be beaten by a lot of different things, but then you go on to say that foreign policy is one of those things, and it's in fact the primary one. I'm asking you to simply state how, if no one reacts to anything he does.
Because it appears that nothing else he does stops his numbers from going up.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we also would like to thank a few people as well. Very first, we'd like to thank the Lee College for hosting this debate. Second, we'd like to thank the Texas Department of Criminal Justice for allowing this debate to happen. Third, obviously, to Adam Key for organizing this event. Fourth, to all of our judges who are here to help us in this discourse of an amazing resolution. Fifth, for the College of Liberal Arts at Texas A&M and the Student Activities Office. Sixth, of course, the Dr. Murcia and the Aggie Agora at Texas A&M. And for allowing our team to be here. Seventh, obviously, for my team for being here, for supporting us, and obviously for helping us to construct this case. Eighth, for my better half, my partner, for being up here and allowing us for this debate. And of course, ninth, my coach, for allowing us to be here and for helping me and my partner grow through debate, especially throughout our entire lives. With that, I'd just like to do a brief roadmap very quickly. First, we'll provide a little bit of framework onto the resolution. Next, we'll go on to case, and then after that, more specifically, the implications and the impacts. And if I have time, we'll go on to the opposition or the affirmative case. If there's not anything that I don't cover in my speech, my partner will cover in his speech. Are my opponents ready? Partner? All right, time starts now. So at the very top of our case, we would like to say, Donald Trump does not have an Achilles heel. No matter what he has done throughout this entire electoral season, throughout the debates, throughout all of his speeches that he has said, it's become clear that no matter what he does, there's no clear Achilles heel that can threaten to bring him down. However, if the judges do not buy that on the first case, let us delve a little bit deeper. First of all, going into the framework. The affirmative provides a great explanation about the Achilles heel, and we'd just like to extend it a little bit further by saying that it is also an explanation for failure, especially in terms of Achilles. And after that, we would like to argue in our case today that it is not foreign policy that is Donald Trump's Achilles heel, but instead it is his temperament. And more specifically, when we're looking towards specific instances where temperament has become his biggest issue, and especially when looking at the whole wide world today, in a world where we're filled with so much communication, either from social media sites like Facebook and Twitter, or merely just from the cameras, from the security and the networks that pervade our everyday society, it's become clear that everyone around us is more scrutinized than it has ever been in the history of human civilization. And as a result, especially for someone who could possibly hold the office of the presidency, the office that is considered by many to be the most powerful office in the entire world, it is important especially that we look at temperament as Donald Trump's Achilles heel. And let's delve specifically into reasons why. First, as the Washington Post states on October 7th, Donald Trump's biggest weakness is his temperament. And what it specifically argues in this is that it impacts more specifically his ability to deal with not just areas within the government, whether that be domestic, foreign policy, but it delves deeper into the connection to the citizens as well. His ability within his temperament, unfortunately, his past remarks have ostracized many people, not including many from the minorities, to also the women as well. And as a result, with a recent Monmouth poll, which was released that last week, it shows that 70% of voters believe that this election has brought out the worst in people, and only 4% believe that it has brought out the best in people. And what this shows is just an extension of the temperament that we have seen specifically from Donald Trump. But let's continue further from this, as we continue especially towards the implications of this. First, because the temperament better explains this failure, because as the Achilles heel, this temperament gives Donald Trump an easy way to explain the failures that he might have, whether it be within this election season or even if he gets elected as president, of pervading especially into the policies and the decisions that he makes as the president of the United States. But the first main reason why this is such a problem is because Donald Trump simply does not listen to his advisors, and primarily because he is inexperienced, but also because of his willingness to go off on issues and especially go off his off-the-cuff remarks, which completely shift positions from where he originally was. Second, we show that this temperament also undermines the legislative relations. As the President of the United States, his objective also, as part of that job, is to be the chief legislator of the United States as well, showing off American policy and and communicating with Congress and being a leader for his party and a leader for the Congress as well, to show what laws get passed and what policy positions that they can hold. Unfortunately, what we see with Donald Trump is, especially within his temperament, as people, especially within Congress, especially people such as Representative Mickey Edwards from Oklahoma, who argues that this guy has real problems, and we simply do not want somebody like him in office, which shows clearly that with his position and his temperament, he does not have the ability to cooperate with Congress in the way that the American president needs to, and especially in order to lead the United States further into the 21st century, to advance the policies that our founding fathers specifically fought hard for. It is important to understand that this temperament simply is not able and is his Achilles heel, especially in terms of being this chief legislator. And also, because of this, it undoes the agenda and also inhibits the efficacy that Donald Trump might have, and especially the legislative procedures that the United States Congress has as well. But finally, this temperament reduces popular support. So we have seen, especially through the debates and also his off-cuff remarks, he continues to alienate women and minorities, some of the key voters, especially in states like Texas, where minority voters are continuing to become a much greater part of the population. He continues bragging about the infidelity, and then unfortunately, this temperament also causes us to start wondering about the bringing down of American values, as this temperament continues to pervade his campaign, and unfortunately, this election cycle as well, which is why you must vote in this negative direction.
Ready? Begin.
You said that his temperament explains his failures, right?
Yes, I did.
Can his temperament also explain his successes?
I would argue in this case, when considering the resolution proposed before us, especially considering the policy implications that this election season has, and the policy that is the possibility of Donald Trump becoming the president of the United States in the future, this temperament has far more concerns about his failures that he can push to in the future, rather than looking towards his past business successes.
Isn't that one of his main platforms is because of his success as a businessman translates him as being a successful candidate and president of the United States? And if that's true, wouldn't that mean his temperament necessarily follows? Simply stated, if he's arrogant and conceited in business, his arrogance and conceited in the office will actually make him successful.
Well, I would say that the world of politics is completely different from the world of business. Like I said at the beginning of my speech, this world is far more interconnected than it has ever been before, whether it be through social media or just the ideal pervasiveness that we all know much more about each other than in any other point in human history. And in that point, his temperament has far much more of an issue in the world of politics, and especially being in the office of the most powerful man in the entire world. His temperament has a much greater deal in order to deal with the successes and to deal with the failures that he has in this presidency. And that is what the negative case is advocating today.
Thank you. I want to clarify, did you have 2 points?
Yeah.
Was your first point, Donald Trump does not have an Achilles heel?
That is an extension of our case that rolls into our framework.
Okay, but you did say Donald Trump does not have an Achilles heel?
Yes.
Okay,
To clarify, what we said was that if you look at your argument about the polls, it's that nothing has brought Donald Trump down. And so if we're going to follow your analysis, it means that Donald Trump doesn't have an Achilles heel. But if the judges don't buy that, then his Achilles heel is not foreign policy.
Thank you.
Reset the clock for me. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I want to take a moment to thank y'all. I want to thank TDCJ, Warden Jones, Warden Dobbins for being here. I want to thank Lee College for the staff for believing in us and for supporting us throughout this entire adventure. I want to thank our coaches mostly who have gave up their free time, and their hard work and energy is what brought us here today. I want to thank Texas A&M University for being here today, such a distinguished university, Giga-Maggies. I want to thank our judges mostly for taking the time out of y'all's busy schedule to come visit us. More importantly, I want to thank everybody who believes in us, in rehabilitation, in the positive power of change. And finally, I want to thank most of all my teammates, because without you guys, we wouldn't be here today. With that, I'd like to start. In our first point, we said Donald Trump's temperament has not affected his success. We showed that Ted Cruz, even after he was being insulted, still supported Donald Trump. The fact is, Donald Trump is at the top of the Republican ticket regardless of his temperament. Our opponents would have us focus that it is his temperament and not his foreign policy, not his ability as a leader that might ultimately bring him down. Remember, our definition is the Achilles heel is his primary weakness, not his only weakness, his primary weakness. That he can be defeated, not that he will be defeated. Our opponents argue that all his failures can be attributed to his temperament. But in cross-examination, they already admitted, well, his temperament made him a successful businessman. If his temperament can lead to his success, why is he there right now? Our second point is Donald Trump's policy is unstable. He has no foreign policy. In 90 minutes in the first presidential debate, Not once did he outline a clear and concise plan for foreign policy. Most notably, foreign policy. Let's build a wall. Let's get Mexico to pay for it. That's a great idea. Now, how are you going to accomplish that? I think Mexico would have something to say about it, and they did. In our third point, Trump jeopardizes his relationship with other countries, which leads into Trump's damaging relations with Mexico. He's insulted Hispanics. He's insulted Muslims. He has no restraints. And this is not a leader who has a clear foreign policy. It might have worked in business, but what guidance does he give us on his foreign policy? He has plenty of other opinions on all the other issues except foreign policy. Our very definition is his foreign policy is his weakness, not his temperament, which leads us to our fourth point. America needs a leader. He's waffling. At first he says this, then he says, no, I didn't say that. He gets fact-checked. Now we find out, well, you know what? He said that earlier. We saw that in the debate when he says, I didn't say that about China. One of the first fact checks to come out. Well, you know what? You actually said it on a tweet. As my colleague mentioned, he had a Twitter fight with the president. Does a leader of the free world actually have a Twitter fight? No. That's not what we look to in our leaders. His campaign manager, his former campaign manager, was found to be backing the Russians. What's his stance on Vladimir Putin? We don't know. He's really soft on that. Our opponents brought this out. There's a big difference in doing business in a country and negotiating with a country. That leads into some of their points. 70% of Americans believe this is one of the worst races ever. Why? Because of his temperament. But the simple fact is, Republicans skyrocket him to the top of that ticket because of his temperament, because he was outspoken, because he wasn't afraid to speak his mind. That's what put him at the top, not the bottom. It is that temperament. It's not a weakness as they claim. It was actually winding up to be one of his strengths. And it's that strength that puts him at the top, and right now he is in a dead heat race with Hillary Clinton because of his temperament. Our opponent's argument that no, it's not his foreign policy, it's his temperament. But they fail to ignore that it's his temperament that put him at the top. For these reasons, you must vote for the affirmative. Thank you.
I'd first like to start off about your point about, when you're talking about the Twitter fights with the president. Wouldn't you argue that these Twitter fights with the president represent more of an issue with his temperament rather than an issue with his foreign policy?
I believe he got into a Twitter fight with the president, which is directly related to his foreign policy. And his temperament is a subset of that, but many Americans support his temperament in that he speaks his mind. But in this instance, it was actually damaging because it directly impacted his future foreign relations. Meaning, if you got into a Twitter fight with the president of Mexico, you become president, now you have to negotiate with that president. What do you say? I'm sorry?
All right, and regarding that issue about for future negotiation with leaders, you mentioned in your speech about how we were about discussing the past and how his temperament was a key to his success as a businessman. But wouldn't you argue, or wouldn't you agree that this resolution also pervades far into the future, with the possibility of Trump becoming president as well?
The resolution is Trump's Achilles heel is foreign policy. When we set up our definition, it says that his foreign policy might cause him to be defeated, not that he will be defeated. We're looking at the election and not long-term with the presidency of what he is, of what he will do when he's in office.
If we're looking at the election, then how does taking in business acumen from 1 to 2 decades ago count as part of this election?
His business acumen relates to his ability to interface with foreign leaders, and specifically, from your statement, was his success as a businessman might not necessarily translate to success in the political stage. Thank you.
All right, before I begin, I would just like to continue to extend the blanket of thanks that we've placed on this round. First, again, thank you to Lee College and Adam Key for organizing this incredibly important event. Thank you to our opponents for participating in this to showcase what they've learned and how important and how impactful these kinds of programs can be. Thank you to my partner for dealing with me. That's always nice. Thank you to my team for coming, as well as to my coach. He's been at A&M as long as I have, and so I think that we've created a pretty solid program here, and I look forward to seeing what we're able to do in the future. Thanks again to the audience. Thank you to the Dean of our College of Liberal Arts. Thank you to the Aggie Agora, and thank you once again to our judges for adjudicating today's round. Your role in this can never be understated. All right, with that, we will begin the responses. Before we begin time, just as a brief roadmap, I'm going to respond to how we're going to weigh the round, and then I'm going to look at their responses on our advocacy and case, and then I'm going to go back to theirs. I'll also signpost exactly where I'm at so that you guys can understand what I'm responding to. All right, so that being said, we're going to begin. So first off, their primary response to our argument that there is no Achilles heel for Donald Trump is that his temperament has made him successful. There's a primary response that we need to make to this. First is that if you look to that Monmouth poll that we cite in our first speech, it's that it discusses the fact that only 1/3 of people in this election believe that the aggressive and negative rhetoric that is espoused by both candidates is justified. What that's going to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, is that very few people who are participating in this election civically actually believe that Donald Trump's temperament is justified. But even further, if you go up to the Washington Post from October 7th of 2016, only 37% of people believe that Donald Trump has the right temperament. Taking this into account, again, not everyone believes he has the right temperament. His temperament is not going to be something you can adjudge as him being successful, but even if you do, that's actually going to be a bigger reason to vote for the negative, primarily because if we're going to accept their idea that we're only focusing on the election, if he has never been able to drop in the polls regardless of what he said, then obviously he doesn't have an Achilles heel, period. So either he doesn't have an Achilles heel, period, or his temperament is going to be a bigger Achilles heel, considering the fact that we're the only side that's provided you any data concerning how people disapprove of his temperament, whereas they provided you zero weighing mechanism or data concerning how people view his foreign policy. So taking that into account, you're already going to see the scale start to shift towards his temperament being a bigger issue. But let's look to the responses that they put on our case. So their primary response is on our point where we talk about how people believe that this is the worst election in history, which is a fair summation. And he says that, well, Republicans have put him at the top of the ticket because he's outspoken. We have a couple responses to this. First, you can reiterate what I just said, that people don't believe in his rhetoric. People believe his rhetoric is unjustified. People believe he is a negative representation. Also, go back to the impacts we placed below where we discussed the fact that he's already alienating so many groups of people, and that's a byproduct of his temperament, not a byproduct of his foreign policy. But even further, what you can also recognize is the fact that, one, no one has ever claimed that the Republicans since 2000 have had any good judgment. And so just warranting that because the Republicans decided to nominate him ultimately makes him a good choice doesn't mean anything. Yes, the Republicans are a political party, and yes, they have made good choices. But just because a political party selects someone does not make them reputable and does not make them qualified. So that is an unwarranted appeal to authority and really doesn't provide you any weighing mechanism for why Trump's temperament isn't his biggest Achilles heel. But even further, go back down to what they don't respond to on our case. What we've shown you exactly is within the scope of not only the election, but also if he has a potential presidency, which is going to be a superior weighing mechanism overall because it gives you a way to not only understand what his Achilles heel will be in the election, but also if he does become a leader, which is something that they very much focus on in their analysis in their fourth point where they discuss his ability to be a leader and how America needs a leader. What we're showing you is that his temperament absolutely undercuts his ability to be a leader. In fact, if you cross-apply what they say in their fourth point about him having Twitter fights, that's absolutely reduced to his temperament. That has nothing to do with foreign policy. So because they bring up this analysis already as a reason why you're voting pro, what you should actually do is take that and place it as a reason to vote for the negation in this resolution. But let's also make some quick responses to their case while I don't run out of time. So first, in their first point, they talk about how it's not his temperament. Just cross-apply everything that we've said. We've obviously shown you that temperament is exactly what his Achilles heel is because it pervades into all aspects of his campaign and and if he gets into office, it will pervade into everything there. All his issues in foreign policy are a direct result of his temperament. Don't let them tell you they're not. Then they talk about the fact that he's unstable. Again, his flip-flopping is more of an indication of poor character and a lack of commitment and ultimately his temperament than it is of his foreign policy. So also, that's going to be our primary response there. And finally, his jeopardizing relationships is all going to come back to temperament. So all of their arguments either flow for us or provide them zero reason to vote for them.
Ready to begin?
Absolutely.
All right. You did say that his temperament was the reason for his Twitter rant and fight with the Mexican president. Is that accurate?
100%, yes. He has the
Isn't
temperament of a
everything that
child.
Donald Trump does a result of his temperament?
Honestly, you could say that most of his issues are a direct result of his temperament, and that's exactly the testimony that we brought forth from a Republican representative, that he has so many issues that you wouldn't want him in public office, and that's a direct reflection of his temperament and how it interacts with other people.
Is a result of his temperament, though, is the question. Everything he does is a result of his temperament. Is that accurate?
Could you clarify what you mean by that?
His temperament plays a role in every single decision he makes and every single comment he makes and every single person that he insults. His temperament is the reason for all of these things on how he handles
it. I think that's fair.
Who did he get in a fight with in the Twitter war? The president of what country?
I believe you brought that up, but I think you said Mexico.
Mexico, correct.
He's also gotten in Twitter fights with Hillary Clinton,
Is
other
Mexico
presidential
a
candidates.
foreign country?
Sure, but that's directly a result of his temperament. If he knew stuff about foreign policy or didn't know anything about foreign policy, it wouldn't change that he has a bad attitude.
Do you believe his temperament is his only weakness?
I believe that it is his pivotal weakness, as we have coined what Achilles heel is.
Do you believe that he has other weaknesses?
I think that they are a direct manifestation of his poor temperament.
Do you believe his foreign policy is a weak part of his policy of his campaign stance?
I would say that his issues in foreign policy are a direct result of his inability to interact with other people, which is a direct result of his poor temperament.
So you agree that his foreign policy is very weak?
I would say that it's weak as a result of his Achilles heel, which is his temperament.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
As a brief roadmap to the judges, what I would like to do during this speech is to provide a brief overview of how this round has gone so far and the main reasons why you should vote towards the negative side. Right? Are my opponents ready? Yes, sir. All right. One of the main important things to consider about the resolution is the tense of the resolution itself. The verbiage in this states that Donald Trump's Achilles heel is foreign policy. This means that we're taking this into the prospect of the current stance that we are seeing today, that is the election of 2016. And when we're looking at the implications that the election of 2016 has, this extends towards not only the current election right now, but it also extends towards the future positions that especially Donald Trump might hold, including the office of the President of the United States. This is important primarily because one of the main attacks that the affirmative side has brought against the negative case is that of the temperament being key to success as part of his business career. Well, we're not here to argue today about whether his business career was successful or not, and there are plenty of reasons why his business career was not successful at all. It is important to consider the aspect of this resolution and the implications that this election specifically has in terms of the future, especially with the idea of Donald Trump being at the top of the United States. And with that, what the negative side would like to say is that as a result of this case mainly focuses particularly on the implications that Donald Trump has as the future of the United States, which is why our case states that the temperament is the main problem that Donald Trump has. Whether it has been, like my partner has said, throughout his entire speech and throughout the entire cross-examination period, whether it was his temperament and towards fighting in Twitter, and also between his escalation of conflicts between many people, especially within the minority community, and also women specifically. It's important to consider these implications as they consider towards the future of the United States. And unfortunately, when considering the possibility of Donald Trump as the President of the United States in the future, it's clear temperament has a much bigger issue than foreign policy does. And to reiterate that, let's go back mainly towards their case again, and to see why temperament particularly has a much bigger issue than foreign policy does. Within our first point, again, we'd like to apply the aspects that we have argued within our case. But second, when talking about how his foreign policy is unstable, and talking about more specifically when they bring up the idea of the Mexican wall, my partner more specifically stated that this idea and these issues that he brought within the Mexican wall come up directly from the temperament itself, and as a result, come up as a priority and with his temperament as a largest issue at hand, and not just within his issue of foreign policy as well. And unfortunately, when we're going towards the next point about how America needs a strong leader, unfortunately, when we're looking at this, America cannot have a leader in the 21st century who is scrutinized as much as Donald Trump. And unfortunately, this scrutiny leads towards the temperament of Donald Trump being far more exposed than past presidents have. Unfortunately, we see that the temperament is the largest issue in the debate today.
As this will be my last time addressing y'all, I want to thank you, judges, for being here tonight, taking time out of your schedule, especially on a Friday. I think there's many other things that you can do, but we're blessed that y'all can join us today. The resolution is Trump's Achilles heel is his foreign policy. Our opponents would have you believe that it's not his temperament, it's not his foreign policy, it's actually his temperament. And our first point, temperament has not affected his success. He's at the top of his ticket. He's a successful businessman. Most of that is attributed directly towards his temperament. This alone negates the entire case for them. And our second one, Trump's foreign policy approach is unstable. Trump has no foreign policy. They haven't shown you where Trump has any foreign policy whatsoever. We talked about Mexico's wall extensively tonight. They say his comments on the Mexico wall was directly related from his temperament. No. The comments on the wall was his direct response when asked, how are you going to handle illegal immigration? That was his response to a foreign policy issue. That's not an appropriate response, regardless of what his temperament was, but it was a direct reflection on his inability to grasp key concepts of foreign policy. That's what we're talking about in our third point. Trump jeopardizes the relationship with foreign leaders, not because of his temperament, but because of his stance on foreign policy. He has none. Build a wall. That's his solution to illegal immigration. Most Americans agree that's not really a good solution. Which leads us to our fourth point. America needs a leader. Trump has demonstrated that he doesn't quite have the capabilities of being a leader, yet he's at the top of the Republican ticket. They voted him there for his temperament. It wasn't a weakness, as they claim. It was a strength. Not a weakness, a strength. He says, our opponents say only 37% believe Trump has the right temperament. Well, if that's the case, why does he have almost 50% of the votes? That means a good majority of the Americans believe that temperament is not an issue. It's not what they said. People believe his rhetoric is unjustified. That doesn't affect his standing on foreign policy. He's talked about the ways that he can fix the economy, do other things, but he hasn't addressed his foreign policy. In the 90 minutes of the presidential debate, not once did he outline a plan for you on what exactly his foreign policy was. He displayed plenty of temperament, but that wasn't his weakness, because we're still talking about him. He says all of the issues in his foreign policy is related to temperament, but in cross-examination, he admitted Donald Trump's temperament is related to Donald Trump. That's just Donald Trump's stance. Finally, he says the tenets of the resolution. We should focus on what exactly he is right now. What he is right now is he's at the top of the Republican ticket. And it was because of his temperament is the reason, not his foreign policy. That is his weakness. Thank you.
All right, howdy. Before I begin my last speech, just a brief overview. I'm just going to be breaking down the round and showing you exactly why the negative has won today's debate. All right, with that being said, thank you once again to everyone for coming. Thank you to our opponents for providing an excellent debate, and thank you to my partner. All right, with that being said, we're going to begin. All right, so at the beginning of their first speech, they tell you that the way you're going to weigh today's round is logic, and that's exactly how you should weigh today's round. We totally agree with this, and so let's break down exactly logically why you have to vote for the negative. The first reason is going to be that while they continue to advocate and say that Donald Trump's clearest example of failure is going to be his foreign policy, this is not going to be a logical enough reason for you to vote. This is primarily, as we have theorized in the entire case, is that his foreign policy is directly affected by his temperament, and that's where this weakness comes from. To think about it a different way, foreign policy and his weakness in foreign policy is the symptom. His disease is his temperament. And so with that being said, what we're going to realize is that his greatest weakness is going to be his behavior, is going to be his temperament. And so that's what I obviously shown you here today. They talk about the fact that because Donald Trump has nearly 50% of the vote, that's going to outweigh the fact that the vast majority of people disapprove of his rhetoric and disapprove of the way that this election has gone and disapprove of the way he behaves. That's not true, because you also have to recognize that while there is a quote-unquote pro-Trump movement, there is equally an anti-Hillary movement. And taking that into account, the idea that Donald Trump has 50% of the vote doesn't mean anything when they're not isolating the fact that people are just voting against Hillary Clinton. So because of that, don't allow them to have that kind of argument going here. But here's exactly why Donald Trump's temperament is going to be his biggest barrier in both the election and as a leader. As we break it down in our initial speech, there's a couple implications that come as a result of his inability to have proper temperament. The first one is that he's not going to listen to advisors. We've seen this throughout the election, and we're going to see this with him being in office. This is going to outweigh whatever they say, primarily because if he cannot listen to advisors, that's going to pervade into his foreign policy. That is also going to pervade into his domestic policy and is going to be the primary explanation for his failure. So, going back to our interpretation of what Achilles heel means, that they really don't contest and ultimately flows very well with what they've said as being the primary explanation for failure, it's very clear that his temperament is going to do that. It's going to explain exactly why he fails. The next impact that we give you is that it's going to inhibit legislative relations. He's never going to be able to work with the people he's supposed to. If we look at examples of really effective presidents like LBJ, he was known as the great negotiator. Every single president after him has been incredible at responding and working with Congress, whether that's Barack Obama or George W. Bush or Ronald Reagan. They worked with Congress. If Donald Trump can't work with Congress, then he's not going to be effective. And that's going to be, again, a direct result of his temperament. The temperament is the disease. The foreign policy is just one of the symptoms. Finally, popular approval. This is something that we've already seen in this data that we've given you. What we've shown you is that the vast majority of people in this country don't approve of the way Donald Trump behaves. If there's anything that's going to keep him from getting elected, it's going to be his temperament. Most Americans really don't care about foreign policy. Even further, if you go back to the initial argument that we made at the top of the case, Donald Trump doesn't have an Achilles heel if you're going to take their idea that nothing he's done has dropped him in the polls. If you're going to accept that analysis, that Donald Trump can't do anything to drop in the polls, then he doesn't have an Achilles heel. But if he does, it's his temperament. And what we've shown you is the fact that no one approves of his behavior. And so when it all breaks down to you, when you logically take this in, what you're going to see is that all of the arguments that you've written down, all the notes you've taken are going to point to one conclusion, and that is that you have to vote for the negative, especially when you look at the fact that even their fourth argument that they put on their case is talking about how he doesn't have the ability to be a leader. What I say is he doesn't have the temperament to be the leader. And those are synonyms, especially when you look at the way they frame his conduct on Twitter, when you look at the way he conducts himself in front of the press. Obviously, that's a direct result of his temperament. His ability to, his jeopardization of foreign relationships is his temperament. His flip-flopping, as they don't respond to our argument about his flip-flopping, we've said that that's inexperience and temperament. They don't respond to this. What we mean by that is that it's not his lack of knowledge on foreign policy. We conclude that he would behave this way whether he knew something or not. So vote for the negative.
All right, I'd like to go. This is going to be the last part of the debate. This is the final rebuttal for the affirmative side. I'd once again like to thank everybody, especially Texas A&M. I mean, we might be felons that you guys are debating against, but at least we're not Longhorns. Thank you so much, everybody, for participating. I only have 3 minutes, so I will try to get in as much information as possible for you judges to make a great decision here tonight. Ready? Begin. The affirmative has 4 points, and we've gone over those 4 points. I told you in the very beginning, the very first speech, I told you there's 2 things that you got to remember here. Distraction and that center window of the resolution. That center window of the resolution is Donald Trump's temperament is not his Achilles heel. It's his electability that we're talking about, not whether his temperament's going to affect what happens once he gets in the White House. It's his electability. So it's really versus what Hillary Clinton's temperament is kind of where it's going, because that's exactly what we said. It was his electability. After the debate, everybody saw his foreign policy, and his numbers began to fall. His numbers didn't fall when he insulted everybody. His numbers went up and up and up until he was on that stage with Hillary Clinton and his foreign policy came out. He was exposed. He was the emperor with no clothes right in front of the world, and he didn't have a foreign policy. And his numbers have just finally started to drop because they finally saw what his foreign policy was. I remind you that that is the resolution, his electability, that foreign policy is the Achilles heel, because his temperament has clearly not done anything to change his, it says he can't get elected. He already got elected. He got elected to the Republican Party with his temperament. So he can be elected with his temperament the way it is. But his foreign policy can stop him from being elected as the President of the United States. I ask you a question, do you like appetizers? I love them. Fried mushrooms, onion rings, it's got that beer batter on it. I challenge you to go to a litter box from a cat, you know that, litter box, And you go over there and you take a sample, use gloves, and you roll it in that beer batter that's delicious, and you fry it. When it comes out, it's going to look awesome. It's going to have a golden brown crust, but do not eat it. It is sheer disgust. It looks great on the outside. Distraction. I told you my opponent would give you distraction with a lot of things. The inside of their case is weak, and it doesn't add up. His temperament, it doesn't stop him from becoming the President of the United States. His foreign policy can stop him. At foreign policy, that's the last Jenga block in the big, giant, tall block of blocks, that Jenga block, that last one, that one that you pull out, that's the one that crumbles his entire electability. That's the one that stops him from becoming President of the United States, because I don't want him dealing with our foreign policies. I don't want him dealing with everybody around the world. It's okay for him to get elected as the Republican nominee, but it's not okay for him to be elected as the President of the United States and the leader of the free world. Do not let them fry the fish on one side, because on the bottom side it's raw and it's uncooked. Vote affirmative, because we have proven our case today. Thank you very much, judges.
At the end of an incredibly close round, there were 5 judges, and it came down like this election to the wire. On a 3-2 decision, the second place in the inaugural George Beto Invitational Debate is Texas A&M University. Which means your champions, the Walls Unit debate team of Lee College, Huntsville Center. Come on, all y'all.
Remember when I said you only saw 2, but there was a lot more? Yeah.
Eight years I've coached, and this is about as proud of it as I've ever been. We did it, guys.